Just before we get started with this Fit Right Pelvic Puzzle podcast episode, the information shared in this podcast is intended for education only and should not replace personalised advice from your healthcare provider. Some episodes include fictional case studies to illustrate common presentations and how a multidisciplinary team might approach them. These stories are entirely fictional and are drawn from a mix of experiences in clinical practice, so any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. Picture this. You go to your physio with prolapse concerns and you get the standard advice. Do more Kegel exercises. But your symptoms don't improve and you're left feeling like you failed. But what if it was the approach that failed you? This week we follow our character Natalie as she learns about tailoring her management to her specific prolapse type and stage and how important it is to avoid recipe approaches. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Pelvic Puzzle. This is a podcast by Fit Right Women's Health where we break down the different puzzle pieces of women's health with the professionals who can help you put it all together. I'm your host, Taryn Watson. I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist from Perth in Western Australia. I'm a lover of early morning walks, coffee, red wine, and all things women's health and exercise. Today's episode is another case study. I want to show you an example of how the various puzzle pieces of management might be brought together to help this particular woman to achieve her goals. Just noting that these case studies are fictional. They're drawn from many different real life examples, but they aren't about one particular person. So let's talk about the puzzle we have today. This one is about Natalie, the 45-year-old mum of primary school age kids who can't ignore her prolapse anymore. Okay, so Natalie is 45. She has had two babies, both vaginal births. They are now 9 and 6 years old. After the first birth, she felt pretty good. She felt like she recovered well. But ever since the second birth, she's just had this feeling that something isn't quite right down there. She's largely ignored it. Like on and off, she feels like she's tried Kegels, but with no benefit. And so her motivation for doing any more of this is really low. And she's felt like this would be all that a pelvic health physio would teach her. So she's been hesitant up to this point to book an appointment to get it sorted out. She can sometimes feel a bulge at the opening of the vagina. So that's the main thing that she's sort of felt since having her second baby. And also she's struggled to open her bowels in the same way that she used to. So as an example, she feels like she knows when she needs to poo, but then when she sits down and tries to go, she always feels like there's a need to strain, even though the stools aren't necessarily hard. Sometimes they are, but even when they're not hard, she's got this feeling that she describes like the poo's getting trapped in a pocket and she's straining to try and get it out. So to complicate matters, she also suffers from IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. She's been told that that's a diagnosis for her symptoms. And her symptoms are that her stool consistency varies widely. It goes between being too hard, too soft and runny, and then somewhere in the middle. When it's in the middle, when it's like normal poo consistency, like we call it sausage or Teflon poo, straining is mild. That's when her symptoms are the least. But when it's like hard little pellets or when it's really soft, she feels like it's much harder to empty well. And sometimes she spends ages on the toilet. Occasionally she's had to use her fingers to like push against the opening of the vagina or the back wall of the vagina. That's helped her to get the poo to come out better. And occasionally she has smearing of poo on her underpants later in the day. And those two symptoms that are things that have got worse recently, they're really distressing her. So she has put up with these symptoms for many years, but because of this worsening over the past few months, and she's also felt like the awareness of the bulge is there during the day more now, she's finally biting the bullet and she's made an appointment to get it looked at. She's booked a pelvic health physiotherapist appointment and she's presented to me at my clinic. So, as part of her initial assessment, after going through all the questions and finding out all the information that I previously said, and there's lots of other things that I would have gone through as well about her medical history and exercise history and her births and everything. But then when we go to do the physical examination, she has agreed to do a vaginal exam with the aim of like me working out what the cause of her symptoms might be. So after I've done a vaginal exam, I feed back to her what I've found, which is that she has average strength and endurance in her pelvic floor muscles. So there's nothing really wrong with her pelvic floor except that it could be a bit better functioning, but there's no major injuries. But what was really noticeable was that I could see the visible bulge just even at rest at the opening of the vagina. And when I further assessed where the bulge was coming from, I worked out that it was the lower part of the back wall of the vagina. So I diagnosed this as what's called a stage 2B rectocele, or another word for rectocele is a back wall or posterior wall vaginal prolapse. So if you want to know more about what that means, like the grading of it and the type of prolapse, I explained that previously in another episode, which we can link in the show notes. So I think that then leads me to what are the three main questions that Natasha had for me, and Natalie had for me, and what the three main things that somebody like Natalie would probably want to know. So the first question is, what is a rectocele and how does that differ to other types of prolapse? Can a prolapse be fixed with pelvic floor exercises? And what is likely to happen as Natalie gets older if she continues to ignore it? Okay, so first question, what is a rectocele and how does it differ to other types of prolapse? So, like I said, you can listen to this more in the previous episode, but just in a nutshell, stage 2B means that on straining, the prolapse of the back wall of the vagina moves down, balloons down inside the vagina, so that the leading edge of it is just outside the vaginal opening. But 2B means it's no more than 1 centimetre outside. So just at the opening or just outside. That's what 2B means. So like I said, I could see it from the outside, but relatively small bulge. A reminder also of what we talked about, that prolapse happens because of a defect in the fascia that supports the organs in the pelvis. Okay, so fascia is the supportive tissue between organs. In this case, there must have been some damage to the fascia of the lower part of the back wall of the vagina. Okay, so this is most likely to have occurred when one of her babies, possibly the second one, if that's when the symptoms started, was passing through the pelvis during birth. Sometimes it might be because a baby has its hand up near its face, for example, or there's lots of other factors that might cause damage to the fascia. But something has caused Natalie to have a defect in the fascia of the lower part of the back vaginal wall. Okay. So what has then happened because of that defect in the fascia is that the rectum, which would usually be held up and supported behind the back vaginal wall, has now been able to like pocket forward into the vagina. Okay, so it's causing a little pocketing. This has caused Natalie to have those two symptoms that we were talking about. So firstly, she's becoming more aware of this bulge coming down from the back wall of the vagina. And secondly, she's bothered now by the fact that when the poo is coming down the rectum, okay, instead of traveling down as it should in a straight line down the rectum out the anus, happy days, that's how we poo. Instead, it's often getting stuck in this pocket. So it's going down and forward into this pocket instead of down and out the anus. So that when I hear that, when people are telling me about their prolapse, when I hear that, that's quite a unique symptom that makes me think and differentiate between whether this person is likely to have a rectocele, back wall prolapse, versus front wall, the bladder prolapse, or the uterus prolapsing. Often women with this symptom find, like I said, Natalie had found out herself, that the only way to get the poo to come out down the right way is to what we call splint. So you can splint from the outside, like push the perineum, the bit between the vagina and the anus, back and up. That's called perineal splinting. That can help. Some people splint inside the vagina, especially if the bulge was a bit higher up. Some people have sort of worked out themselves that if they put their finger or thumb inside the vagina and push backwards, that can help with getting the poo to not come down into that pocket. So that's really good that Natalie worked that out, and that she's realized that helps. And I would encourage her to keep doing that to help with optimal emptying. But yeah, that having to do that is one of the things that's really distressing Natalie. So that's an explanation of what is a back wall prolapse, what is a rectocele, and how it would present. But how does treatment of a back wall prolapse maybe differ from other types of prolapse? So that brings me to the next question. The next question is, can a prolapse be fixed with pelvic floor exercises? And also, I guess, associated with that is, can a prolapse be reversed or cured? Like, can we fix a prolapse? So Natalie has tried Kegels and she doesn't think they've helped. Now, is this because she hasn't been doing the right type of pelvic floor exercise or the right dosage, etc.? It could be, but is it perhaps because pelvic floor exercises are not going to be a big piece of the puzzle of her management? So in answer to the question, do pelvic floor exercises help prolapse? Traditionally, the research that's been done on this, where they've done research projects on does pelvic floor muscle training help prolapse symptoms or help a prolapse go up further into the vagina again? It's almost always shown, the research has almost always shown, yes, it does help. So we have been confidently able to say that, yes, pelvic floor training should be considered as a first-line approach to somebody with a prolapse. But these studies have often been pretty low quality, or they have had fairly lackluster results. Like they've shown, yes, it helps, but maybe only mildly better than the control group, right? So one thing that has been evident in the research, and one thing that I've been hearing more in recent years in the research updates that I've attended and things, is that researchers have traditionally lumped all types of prolapses and all stages of prolapse together in these studies. So they've done pelvic floor training to see if it helps on women who might have back wall prolapses and front wall prolapses and uterine prolapses and stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4 prolapse, perhaps. So what we know, though, in reality, is that if somebody has a prolapse that's already dropping down in the vagina, so that at rest, when somebody's just standing or sitting or lying down, the prolapse is actually already down to the point of being past where the pelvic floor kind of lifts the vaginal walls up, then they're unlikely to make any difference to what's happening at their prolapse with a pelvic floor contraction or with pelvic floor exercises, because it would potentially just be squeezing around the prolapse like this, like on the edges of the prolapse. If somebody had the walls up in an anatomically correct position, then the pelvic floor can lift underneath and up. But if it's already down at that level, can the pelvic floor muscles actually lift? So that's one thing to consider. The stage of the prolapse definitely makes a difference on whether pelvic floor muscle training is going to help or not. Unless, of course, it's a more severe prolapse and you put a pessary to support everything inside and then do pelvic floor exercises. That's different. Also, we know that the way the pelvic floor muscles are orientated in the pelvis means that when it's contracted, it's not straight like this, like that. It's for those who are watching, I'm using my hands. Um, it's actually orientated so that the front part gets lifted up, but the back part often ends up being underneath the back of where it gets lifted. So what what that means is that when you do pelvic floor muscle training, you're quite likely to be lifting the front wall up and maybe the uterus up, but you're very unlikely to be doing anything to the lower part of the back wall of the vagina. Okay. So back to the and sorry, just noting with all this, with this talk about the stage affecting it and the type of prolapse affecting it, just noting that I said Natalie's prolapse is both a back wall prolapse, the lower part of the back wall, and it's staged at 2B, meaning it's sitting below the level of the levator muscles. So back to the research, is the fact that the results have been mixed and often with only minor improvements in symptoms, is it because they've lumped in those women who have the type of prolapses that, like Natalie, aren't as likely to be able to be helped by pelvic floor training with those who would potentially be much more likely to get good results? And could we get more specific in clinical practice with knowing who is more likely to get better without needing to go to surgery or try a pessary, and encourage them to try conservative management and give that a really good shot? Like give pelvic floor training a really good 3 or 4 month shot of doing it daily and see if that helps. But can we avoid just giving everybody 3 or 4 months of pelvic floor training, which is a big commitment, before deciding whether further treatment is needed? And possibly what that would lead to, if we just kept giving everybody that same approach, regardless of whether they've got a type of prolapse that's not going to probably be helped anyway, we're probably going to have a lot of women like Natalie just thinking they've failed because they haven't tried hard enough with their Kegels, when actually that was never going to help them. So back to the research again, another example of some recent research was a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, which in research speak just means they've looked at a whole lot of pretty good quality trials altogether, and summarized across all the trials what the results were. They had, and all the studies they looked at and grouped together were looking at whether pelvic floor muscle training was helpful for prolapse management. This again showed generally, yes, pelvic floor muscle training did help, but only small differences, right? But then this meta-analysis went and split into those with a front wall prolapse compared to those with back wall prolapse. And what they found was that the front wall prolapses were twice as likely to improve a stage, like go from a stage 2 back up to a stage 1, for example, than the back wall prolapses. And in fact, those with a back wall prolapse, like Natalie, did not significantly improve with pelvic floor muscle training alone. So it's not just in practice we see this. This is what the research is showing as well. And the research is finally starting to divide it up like this. So in a nutshell, yes, pelvic floor muscle training can help prolapse symptoms and can improve the stage of a prolapse sometimes, but not in all women. And the types of prolapse that are most likely to improve with conservative management, which includes pelvic floor muscle training and lifestyle advice, which I'll get to in a sec, is stage 1 and stage 2, probably 2A, front wall, anterior vaginal wall prolapses. So that's not Natalie, which of course brings me back again to one of my original soapbox issues, that women with prolapse symptoms should not be being referred to a physiotherapist who's not trained to do vaginal exams and prolapse assessments. Okay. One of my big bugbears are women who have just been assumed from their symptoms that they've got prolapse and not assessed as to what type or what stage, and just put in a Pilates class or given generic Kegel exercises, and then they've ended up, I've met them months or years down the track when they're really despondent about it and have spent a lot of money on trying this and a lot of energy. So yeah, not every woman should just be encouraged to do Pilates and Kegels with a prolapse. So how can we help Natalie then? Should she just take a wait and see approach? Is there anything that a physio can do? Should she go straight to surgery? And I guess the question that Natalie had for me was, what will happen if as I get older, if I just continue to ignore it? Well, like, is it possible that doing nothing is going to make it will eventually get better? My answer to that would be that no, it isn't likely that this prolapse will get better by itself. And already Natalie's noticed that it's worsening. So the fact that Natalie is having to strain when she poos a lot of the time means that every time she's doing that, she's actually probably pushing the prolapse further down and further weakening that fascial support of the back wall. So unless she can stop straining like that, that's going to be something that would potentially continue to make it worse over time. Also, noting Natalie's age, she's probably likely to go through perimenopause soon if she hasn't already. And that drop in estrogen that will happen and that change in hormones. Two things might happen with that might make her more bothered by the prolapse. So first, her muscles globally, but including the pelvic floor, are likely to get weaker, although we have determined that this scenario isn't really about muscular control anyway. But secondly, the tissues in the vaginal walls are likely to get thinner and drier and more sensitive with lower estrogen. So this means that Natalie might become more aware of the prolapse rubbing against the vaginal opening, even if anatomically it hasn't worsened. So what can Natalie do then? And this brings me to the part of the podcast where we look at all the puzzle pieces that could be pulled together for Natalie. So the first puzzle piece is pelvic health physio. Okay, so me, what can I do? A physio like me can still help women with posterior vaginal wall prolapses. We also can still help women with prolapse that descends to the opening or outside the opening, like a 2B or a 3 prolapse, but it's unlikely that that would just be with pelvic floor muscle training alone. I would probably give Natalie pelvic floor exercises and teach her how to do that, but I feel like it would be irresponsible to let a certain proportion of women, including Natalie, think that she's got a good shot of curing her prolapse if she just does those exercises. I would talk to Natalie quite early in the piece about a vaginal support pessary. So again, we'll talk about these in more depth in other episodes. But in a previous episode, I talked about a ring pessary, like a silicone ring-shaped pessary that somebody that particular patient would have been a good candidate for. Now, Natalie would not be a good candidate for a ring pessary, probably, because ring pessaries sit on top of the pelvic floor muscles on the same angle as the levator muscles, the pelvic floor muscles. So they're down at the front and up at the back, and the lower part of the back wall of the vagina sits underneath where the pessary would be supporting, a ring pessary would be supporting. So probably not a ring. Probably a cube pessary or another space-occupying pessary might be helpful in lifting the back wall up and decreasing her symptoms. Can this cure her prolapse? Probably not. But there are some case study reports that show that daily use of a pessary like a cube can lead to the prolapse stage reversing over time. Probably with tissues remodeling in a more anatomically correct position while the prolapse is held up inside all the time. The other thing that definitely I do as a pelvic health physio, as well as looking at whether she would like to try a pessary and weighing up the pros and cons of that, would be looking at lifestyle factors. So the way she's pooing, for example, and how to minimize strain during pooing. Look at how she's sitting on the toilet, how she breathes and uses her pressure during a poo. I'd also be looking at the way she manages pressure in other parts of her life too, like how she's lifting, how she's exercising, and just make sure that there weren't other things in her life that were accidentally causing repetitive strain down through there. Okay, so the next puzzle piece would be medical, like women's health GP or a gynae. So that's the next puzzle piece. Natalie should definitely have the option of surgical management talked about, how and what that would look like to surgically repair the back wall, surgically repair the rectocele. A women's health GP would be a good place to start because they could discuss with her what goes on in the surgical repair, what the risks versus rewards are. And just on that note, interestingly, Although conservative management can be trickier with a posterior vaginal wall prolapse, like pelvic floor training and stuff, is not as effective. Surgical repair of a back wall prolapse can be more straightforward than a front wall prolapse. So if this prolapse is really bothering her a lot, she might end up feeling that the benefits of having this surgery outweigh the risks of it. She might also choose that the timing of doing this surgery is good now. Her children don't need lifting now like they did as babies and toddlers. So a mum with kids younger than her might struggle to be able to rest for the 6 weeks necessary afterwards. She might feel like she could. She might be keen to have the surgery done now while she's young and has good tissue quality, and all these things can be discussed with a women's health GP and eventually also with a gynecologist. The GP can be the one to refer to the gynecologist. Physio can't make that referral, so you need to go via a GP to get to a gynecologist anyway. The GP during this appointment could also look at the IBS, the irritable bowel stuff, and rule out any medical stuff to do with that if that hasn't been done already. The GP could also potentially look at prescribing topical estrogen, like estrogen cream or something that you put inside the vagina, for addressing vaginal dryness and sensitivity, if that's thought to be factors in her being more symptomatic. And to be honest, I would love for all women in their mid-40s to be making an appointment with a women's health GP to screen for hormonal related issues and general health issues as they move into perimenopause. So that's definitely that appointment, and that puzzle piece would definitely be good for Natalie. Another puzzle piece here would be a dietitian. Okay, so with her history of IBS and her variable stool consistency, I think that having a women's health dietitian review what she's doing would really be helpful, regardless of whether she decides surgery or not. Can you imagine how much more likely it would be for a type 1 stool, which is like the little like rabbit pellet, like the animal dropping sort of pellets? Can you imagine how much more likely those hard little piece of stool would be to get trapped in a pocket rather than a poo that comes down nice and smooth altogether? Might not be as likely to get trapped. Or imagine like loose stools, like or sticky stools. Imagine how much more likely that would be to potentially get trapped in the pocket. And maybe that's what's causing that symptom of smearing on her underpants afterwards. So if she can get her stool consistency good, she might have a big improvement in her symptoms already. So yeah, definitely dietitian input would be great. And then lastly, a physio or a PT or an exercise physiologist who can help her with exercise and getting globally strong would be a good puzzle piece potentially too. So Natalie should, if she's not already, have the option of being helped with getting into the habit of a strength and conditioning program that would optimize her leg strength, her core strength, her general global strength and fitness, so that activities of daily living like getting up off the floor and getting up from the chair and things are not causing her an unnecessary strain. The stronger she can be globally, the better. So I hope that gives you more of an insight into prolapse management beyond just Kegels and how different types of prolapse are managed in different ways. And also how a team approach like that at FitRight HQ with our multidisciplinary team members all under the one roof can pull the puzzle pieces together finally for someone like Natalie. So thank you very, very much for tuning into the Pelvic Puzzle. If this episode about Natalie resonated with you, I'd love for you to share this with a friend. I'd love for you to leave a quick review because it helps more women get access to this kind of information. And if you think you'd like support, the team at FitRight Women's Health is always here to help. Our women's health clinic is in Applecross, Western Australia. We also have a clinic in West Perth, and we offer telehealth appointments. You can find links to book an appointment or an exercise class with us in the show notes. I'll catch you next time as we keep putting the puzzle pieces together of the pelvic health puzzle and save the world one pelvic floor at a time.